All right, today we're tackling a really challenging, kind of paradoxical idea. What if empathy, the very thing we're told will save us, could actually be our undoing?
We hear it all the time, right? Empathy is the solution. It's supposed to be this amazing human quality that can bridge divides, heal wounds, maybe even save the entire world. But what if that's not the whole story? What if that very same emotion, the one we think is our salvation, could actually, in some cases, lead to our downfall? And that brings us to a super controversial, really charged idea called suicidal empathy. So we're going to break down what this term really means, who's using it, and why it's smack in the middle of some of the most intense debates happening right now. Okay, so what is it? If we strip away all the political baggage for a second, the term basically describes a situation where a group's compassion for an outgroup, people outside their own community, could actually, maybe even unintentionally, lead to the harm or destruction of their own in-group. Now, as you can probably imagine, this idea is fiercely debated. So let's start with the first big perspective, the argument that this term isn't some neutral observation. Nope, it's actually a powerful rhetorical weapon. So critics of this term say it's used to create what's basically a Trojan horse narrative. The idea is that it takes something that sounds great, like kindness or helping outsiders, and twists it, reframing it as this hidden, secret threat to your group's survival. And you can see how that framing has some pretty serious consequences, right? It can lead to dehumanizing the others, making it seem like they just can't fit into society. It's also used to justify hostility, painting it as just necessary self-defense. And a lot of this is built on what you'd call zero-sum thinking, this idea that rights and safety are like a finite pie, and if they get a slice, that means you're losing yours. Okay, but that is only one side of the coin. The opposing argument frames this totally differently. For them, this isn't about stirring up fear at all. It's about making a valid critique of what they see as really flawed decision-making. This side of the argument brings in a different but related idea, pathological altruism. It sounds complicated, but it's basically when a sincere, genuine desire to help someone actually ends up causing a ton of unforeseen harm. And that harm could be to the very people you're trying to help, or it could be to your own community. So the concern from this perspective is that really big, important decisions are being made based on raw emotion, not on sound, thought-out policy. Proponents of this view worry that we're ignoring the long-term consequences, that leaders might be neglecting their core duty to their own citizens, and that it all becomes more about virtue signaling, looking good, than about getting real, practical results for everyone involved. So that's kind of the standoff, right? On one hand, you've got the view that this term is just a nasty tool to justify xenophobia by making kindness look dangerous. But on the other hand, you have the view that it's a legitimate critique of bad policy that's driven by emotional bias. One side sees a zero-sum game, the other prioritizes a duty to their own group. So how on earth do you even begin to bridge that gap? Well, that brings us to a potential third way forward, a path that tries to move beyond this simple black and white choice between pure emotion and pure hostility. There's a psychologist, Paul Bloom, who has a really fascinating take on this. He suggests that maybe the problem we're wrestling with isn't empathy itself. The problem is what he calls narrow empathy. And to get what he means, he says to think of empathy like a spotlight. It's super powerful, right? It shines a bright light. But a spotlight, by its very nature, has a narrow focus. So when you shine that spotlight on one person or one group that's in trouble, you feel their pain so intensely. It's all you can see. But here's the catch. While you're doing that, you're pretty much leaving everyone else in the dark. And a decision that helps the person right there in the spotlight might actually end up harming someone who's standing just right outside the beam of light. So the proposed solution here is something called rational compassion. And no, this isn't about being cold or heartless. It's about pulling the camera back to see the whole entire picture. It means making decisions based on facts, on long-term stability, and on what's best for the most people possible, not just based on that one single story that happens to pull the hardest at our heartstrings. Ultimately, this really gets us to the heart of the matter. The true meaning of a term like suicidal empathy isn't set in stone. It really, truly all comes down to the intent behind why someone is using it. Think about it. If the intent is to just say they are a threat, period, then the term becomes a weapon, a tool for persecution. But if the intent is to ask a genuine question, like how can we help people effectively without causing harm to our own communities, well, then it becomes part of a really important, necessary debate about resources and policy.
So this whole framework gives us a new way to look at these really tough conversations. It pushes us to look past the scary-sounding label and ask, okay, what's the real goal here? So the big question for all of us is this. When we hear this kind of language out there in the world, which intent do we think is really driving the conversation?